start by saying how thankful I am for the invitation that now sees me standing on this podium. The young volunteers who have taken time to ensure that the processes leading to this gathering are success, I salute you. To the individuals in different parts of the United States who have facilitated this visit, I also salute them. I always tell my friends that when you want to know that an African has acclimatized in the United States, there are few tests that you perform, and one of them is when in Cincinnati, when they start saying Cincinnati, then you know they are now properly acclimatized in the United States. And when they are in New Mexico, when we were learning geography, there was a particular place in New Mexico which our teachers very confidently told us Albuquerque. Then we discovered that is Albuquerque. Then you know that they are in the United States of America. And of course, we come and ask for water and they say water. Then we know they're in the United States of America. But that aside, the significance of gatherings such as this is not because they give us the opportunity to deliver, but to talk about very practical things, particularly as it relates to the continent of Africa. The continent of Africa is the mother continent, and this we say times without number. There is not a single part of the world that has not known the benefit of the continent of Africa. Many of you will travel to Europe, to Brussels, which is the headquarters of the European Union. If you for one moment imagine that Brussels glitters, it glitters because of the minerals that she took from the Republic of Congo. If you stand at the entrance of the Buckingham Palace in the United Kingdom, which is not so united anyway, you see the gold there. It is true that that gold came from Ghana, which they referred to as the Gold Coast. And if you then are invited by an Englishman for a cup of tea and claim that it is English tea, that tea will have come from Kenya in Africa. And if indeed you go to Switzerland and they talk about the Swiss chocolate, however christened, that chocolate will have come from Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana or Togo. And if you go to many capitals of the world and you see electricity, perhaps some copper from Zambia was utilized. And if you come to this great United States of America and you desire to talk about her greatness, it is and daughters of Africa spirited from her several years ago that worked themselves to death to make this continent great. And if you go to Brazil, it is the same thing. And we say all these things to remind us that Africa has touched every part of the world. And there is a sense in which, gone through that furnace of trials and tribulations, the continent has been traumatized. And this trauma has undermined her. Many times that we talk about the division of Africa on that infamous day in Berlin in 1884, and we talk about it casually if it was a historical event now fossilized in history. Yet its impact is as alive today as it was those years ago, and Africa continues to suffer because of the and rapacious events that took place in Berlin in 1884. Conflicts that undermine Africa's growth and development were manufactured in Berlin, so that today, when you look at the continent of Africa and you see Mali is underachieving, or Chad is underachieving, or Burkina Faso is underachieving, it's not only because of Berlin in 1884, but because of the courtesy of Berlin, that the French still treat that part of the world as if it were a fiefdom of France. It is because of those activities that when we seek to do things as a continent, there is a sense in which for some reason we have now been persuaded that if the Portuguese were present in Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau, then the Cabo Verdean and the Guinea-Bissauan is different from the Liberian, and that does undermine us. And indeed, that is the very same attitude that we have when we go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we are quick to be reminded that the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo are different from the people of Central African Republic. These issues may be discussed as historical curiosities, but they are not, because Africa continues to be weighed down by these events. Indeed, one may say that heritage continues to be like an albatross on the neck of Africa, and indeed in many ways her Achilles heel. But we have now taken a solemn vow that we cannot continue to be consigned in that corner of history and continue to labor under a perpetual state of lamentation. And that is why we are now beginning to ask ourselves the very important question, what it is that we can do in order to ensure that the continent of Africa does not continue to punch below her weight. And indeed, this question is one that has troubled many Africans, or those who belong to the continent of Africa, or those of our sons and daughters who live in the diaspora. On the 5th day of the month of April in 1906, a young South African, whom some of you have read about, sometimes referred to as the father or the founder of the African National Congress in South Africa, Pixley Kaisa Kasem, was participating in a debate here in the United States at the University of Columbia, and he delivered a speech which then was to inform succeeding generations of African freedom fighters. And the title of that speech, which I commend to you to read, is The Regeneration of Africa. And the word regeneration was used very deliberately, and I use it very deliberately, because when we talk about the regeneration, we mean that there was an Africa which was performing at a certain level, but she was reduced in her level of performance, with the consequence that she now punches, as I've already said, below her weight, and she punches below her weight in the arena of economics. She punches below her weight in the arena of military strength. She punches below her weight in the political arena, and many are the times that when she is invited to the dinner table of the nations of the world, she is not invited as a diner, but she is invited as a waiter to wait on other civilizations. And we are now convinced that that position must pass. And we are posing to ourselves the question, how can that be reversed? And we are conscious of the fact that there are 1.4 billion or 1.5 billion individuals who are in the continent of Africa, but we are also aware that there are nearly 400 million individuals of African origin to be found in all the continents of the world. They are to be found here in the United States of America. They are to be found in South America or Latin America, some would prefer to call it. They are to be found in Australia. They are to be found in Asia. They are to be found in Europe. And some of them came here and willingly their ancestors had been enslaved. And some, and that includes most of you who are present in this arena, have come here in search of knowledge. And you came here in search of knowledge, in the knowledge that that knowledge would be used and would be deployed in the mother continent. And you are now serving this continent in different capacities. So that indeed today, when you look at the Africans in the diaspora, if you want to look at some of the best doctors that Africa has ever produced, you come to the United States of America or you visit Europe. If you want to find some of the best engineers that Africa has ever produced, they come and they are resident in this continent. If you want to look at the best architects, they are to be found here. If you want to look at some of the best lawyers, they are possibly to be found here. If you want to look at the best academicians and researchers, they are to be found here. And despite the fact that they have geographically relocated from the mother continent, there is something that is resident in them and alive in them that asks them the quintessential question: what can we do in order to contribute to the development of the mother continent? And that is what legitimizes this gathering this evening. You are here because the question is being posed to you rhetorically: what can we do so that the mother continent can realize our potential? During the short period that I have been here, I've been asked many questions, but those many questions can actually be conflated with a single question: how can we regenerate the mother continent? That is the question. It may come in different permutations, but the question is, how can we regenerate her? And this is not an arcane science. It can be done, and it has been done. And many of you, in your many ways, are doing it. But the question is how to do it better. This is the question. Many of you who are present in this room are aware that it is because of your remittances every month that your families are alive today. It is because of your remittances every month that your mothers, your fathers, your sisters, your brothers are alive today, because you enabled them to go to some health facility and they were rescued by those remittances. Many of you are here and aware that were it not for your intervention, your siblings would not go to school. Many are here who have come out of their environments in Africa because the environment was hostile and they could not fulfill themselves, but yet the basis of their departure from the continent notwithstanding, they are still asking this nagging and this perennial question: what can we do to generate or to regenerate the continent of Africa? That same question that Isa Kaseme asked in 1906. You know, you are in the Western world, and many times in ordinary discourse, you talk about the fourth industrial revolution. You talk about nanotechnology. You talk about 5G. These are the things that you talk about. But I know somewhere in South Sudan, they are not talking about those things. I know somewhere in Tigray, in Ethiopia, they are not talking about those things. I know somewhere in northern Mozambique, not talking about those things. I know somewhere in Chad, in Mali, in Mauritania, in Ambazonia, they are not talking about those things. They do not have the peace of mind that enables them to talk about those things. Those are the things that are going to revolutionize and change the continent of Africa. Those are the things that we expect you to take back home. So that Africa, as I see her today, and I'm not a doctor, but I think I can be some license to use a term that is medical, and particularly in the arena of mental health, that Africa presents in a very schizophrenic way. She has a split personality. There are parts of her that can talk about the things that I've mentioned, but there are parts of her that cannot afford that luxury. But yet, we cannot allow Africa to be overtaken during this fourth industrial revolution. The question is, how are you going to facilitate that? When I look at the mobile phone, it came when I was alive and well and an adult of sound mind, the mobile phone. I've seen her grow. I remember the days when if you owned a mobile phone which was mounted in your car, it was a symbol of your social status. I remember those days as if it was yesterday. I remember when it graduated, when Nokia was the thing that you had to have in your pocket, and if you had it, you had to have every excuse to expose it to whoever was sitting next to you. I remember those days so very vividly. And I remember that there was at one time BlackBerry, and you had every opportunity to demonstrate to your neighbor that you are the proud owner of BlackBerry. I remember those days vividly. And I remember that we grew from that, and there were only things that you use for communication. But I now know for a fact that that little gadget has revolutionized the banking sector in Africa. You can sit in the comfort of this room and send money to your mother or your sister in Banjul in the Gambia, or Freetown in Sierra Leone, on Monrovia or Bangui or Mbambane in Eswatini. That is how technology has changed the world. Whether you call it wave or you call it anything else, it has changed the world. Why do I say that? That because the contribution that you are allowed, or you ought to be making to Africa, should be sensitive of the technological realities that are now rampant in the world and are changing African societies. When my good friend Dr. Nchenga was speaking and talking about Wakanda, this movie was played, it was sci-fi. That is what you saw it for. There is now an attempt to construct that sci-fi and bring it on the ground, so that Wakanda, in the manner in which he presented here, may be something that it is up there high. But if you break it down, you are simply saying that we are trying to look for African solution to African problems. That is my understanding of the Wakandization of these particular issues. So that we as people in the African continent must ask very fundamental question: what is it that we can do? And I want to say a few things so that I do not give a wordy account of what is obvious. The diaspora is critical for the next phase of the growth of Africa. The statistics vary depending on who is saying what, but there is unanimity on one thing: that the remittances that Africa receives from her sons and daughters in actual dollars is anything between 50 and 50 billion United States dollars. That is what is documented. There are other intangibles and other undocumented support that Africa receives from her sons and daughters. But because they are uncoordinated, sometimes the impact is not felt as it ought to be felt. I think it is yesterday or the day before yesterday when I told my audience that when you want to change the world, you've got to be like water, agile and formless. When it is in a glass, shape of a glass. When it is in a bottle, it takes the shape of a bottle. When it is collected in a small puddle, it is called a pond. When it is flowing, you call it a river. When it is confined by land, sometimes you call it a sea. When it knows no boundaries and separates continents, you call it an ocean. But yet, its great splendor lies in the fact that it is adaptable. I'm now suggesting to you and to all of us here that one of the ways in which you can make great impact in the continent of Africa is to unite your efforts. Since I came here, I've seen and I've interacted with several organizations that are run by Africans and support Africa, people of African origin, people who are doing great things in the continent of Africa. Some of them I did not know, some I knew. But it surprises me that some of these interventions are to be found in the inner recesses of the continent of Africa. Yesterday I had the Judge Yates, and I discovered that an organization in which he serves is active, changing lives in Kenya. This morning I interacted with Dr. Lewis, and I discovered that some of the work they are doing is changing lives in Tanzania. And many more stories that have not been told and which are known to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that Africa is a great continent and is capable of even being greater. The question that you must ask yourself and pause for a moment to ponder over is what you can do. Even as I'm here, if I was an evangelical priest, I would ask you to pause for a moment and empty your minds and think about Africa. That continent that is shaped like a question mark. And ask yourself, what question is she asking you? I'm speaking particularly to the younger generation who are present here. Ask yourself that question. You've come here to the United States of America to acquire that knowledge. How are you going to deploy that knowledge to change your village? Ask yourself that question. I'm not asking you to physically relocate to Zimbabwe or to Zambia or to Sierra Leone or to Nigeria or to Ambazonia or the Cameroon or Senegal. But I'm asking you to find a way of stretching your hands in a sustainable way and save your mother continent. There used to be a basketball player in this United States of America called Dikembe Mutombo. He did not say many wise things, but he said one wise thing. That when you have used the elevator to take you up, make sure it goes down to bring others up. You have come here via an elevator, make sure the elevator goes down. I also remember those immortal words spoken by the American civil rights fighter Jesse Jackson when he said, "Don't look at a man or a woman who is down unless you want to raise him up." Suggesting to you, for those of you who are not of African origin, forget about the images that are played by CNN of doom and gloom. There is glow and glitter in the continent of Africa. And I'm suggesting to you that we can improve that image, because tell me, what is there in the world that can never be made even better? That is our duty. We come from a continent whose sons and daughters have demonstrated that they are resilient. Tom has never visited the continent of Africa. If you want to understand man's inhumanity to man in its ugliest splendor, ask the African. Just this afternoon we went to the underground rail and we saw man's inhumanity to man. That yet the Africa is alive and well. And once that face of us had been eliminated by Africans and other civilizations of goodwill, those whose only claim to fame is to trample Africa underfoot, brought yet another scheme of man's inhumanity to man, the colonial project. And that too disappeared somehow. And when that also lost its luster, they brought another thing called the neo-colonial project, which is a Kwame Nkrumah, the Osagyefo of Ghana, says that there is nothing more pernicious than the neo-colonial project, because it is slavery and colonialism and neo-colonialism rolled into one, but wearing a friendly mask. He compares it to the Trojan horse. That is where we find ourselves. So the 400 million people of African origin who are resident outside of the continent of Africa, what is the contribution that you can and must make? For how can you afford a sleep if you are Zambian, if your village has no potable water? How can you? Even if you sleep, sleep departs from your eyes. If you are from Zimbabwe and you know that there is 90% unemployment, how can you possibly sleep soundly? If you are from Ambazonia and you know that if you visit your rural home, you are a possible victim of kidnap, how can you possibly afford the luxury of sleeping? And if you are from Nigeria, how can you? If you are from Ethiopia and you know that 4.4 million are displaced in Tigray, how can you? Even if you wanted to sleep, sleep departs. And this is why you are here in this assembly. You would have been elsewhere, but you have chosen to be here in order that we may share our thoughts on how Africa can be regenerated. And I'm not saying the things that I'm saying because I have the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom. No. Any one of you who have been bitten by the bug of Africa could have been possibly invited here and would possibly be saying the same things with greater passion and possibly greater eloquence than I can ever master. What I'm doing is to share my thoughts with you in the knowledge that these ideas that I'm propagating are only valuable if they are cross-fertilized and cross-pollinated. Brethren, when one thinks about Mother Africa and the need for a regeneration, one can go on and on. But as a young student of economics, I was taught that there is something called the law of diminishing returns. And that law is now beginning to operate in your minds and hearts. And that law now tells me that I must conclude. And conclude I will by telling you that going forward, it is going to be necessary that we combine our efforts so that we may help the mother continent. Whatever you are doing, whatever organization that you belong to, make sure that you are coordinated. Always remember this saying, which is the saying of the wise, which is not original to me, but which I use every so often, that the ocean cannot exist in split. You cannot be the ocean, but be a good droplet. Always remember that the tree cannot be the forest, but there is no forest without a tree. Be a good tree. That is all we ask. I have no doubt in my mind that those of us who are in the mother continent, the little things that we are doing, and the little things that we are doing, if we combine our efforts, we will not change the world dramatically, but what we will have done will change the world. Because some in the United States of America, the man with whose quote I want to conclude happens to be an American, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said that if you make the world clean, don't complain. Sweep your front yard. And once you sweep your front yard and your neighbor sweeps their front yard, the whole world will be clean. And I remember Ralph Waldo Emerson also said that if a better mousetrap than your neighbor, then even if you live in the wood, the world will make a wooden path to where you live. I'm asking you today to sweep your front yard and to make a better mousetrap, and together, you of African origin, whether you relocate physically to Yaoundé in Cameroon or you do it virtually, I do not care. What I care is that you are making a contribution and you are changing your village, your village, hamlet by hamlet. It can be done, it must be done, because if it is not done, we ourselves may be done. God bless you.